What is up, YouTube? It's Aaron back here with the channel. I'm going to be doing a DOOD learning series where myself and my good friend Cormac Adams are going to go over it. Cormac, introduce yourself real quick.
Hi there. My name's Cormac. For those of you who don't know me, I'm supposed to give a very brief intro. I'm the current UK national champion. I won earlier this year with Mitsurugi Raisiel. I've been part of Disciples for a couple of years now. So if you know the likes of Gabriel Netz, Alex Robertson, who was previously on Aaron's channel, you might know me from that group as well. Just to kind of give you an idea of where my understanding is with the current format, I basically took about a month break after the European Championships because I didn't have any events to play or anything like that. So I kind of missed a lot of the beginnings of Justice Hunter's format. So I kind of wanted to speak to Aaron here, who's been doing a lot of content recently in the past month or so, especially with the Justice Hunter's decks. I figured he'd be a good person to go to, kind of get a good understanding of where we kind of are right now with the meta, where we're sitting right now, and kind of how that basis is then going to translate to post dude format as I start preparing for YCS Lille at the end of this month.
Yeah, so the way we're going to break this series down real quick is we're going to do where we are currently into looking at some of the new DOOD cards and how we think they'll affect the meta. Secondly, we'll do another video which is going to come out, and it's going to be us starting to learn the decks, start playing games, learning combo videos, watching some content from both the OCG and the TCG side. And then our last video is going to be us actually playing games against each other, trying to figure out how we play games, new decks. Probably both against each other and maybe against a current deck, just see how they shape up. So yeah, real quick, we'll review Justice Hunter's format. We just had Worlds, which was a pretty similar format to where the TCG is at, just minus Mitsurugi Raisiel. Vanquish Soul Canine won that, so that. Obviously Yummy are just the two top decks that probably anticipate. Obviously there's still Malice and Mitsu Raisiel. It's kind of like a 6-deck format if you include those four, Crystron K9, and then also Dracotail, which seems to be kind of falling off a little bit in terms of representation. I think the deck is obviously strong. It's going to get some new support. I think it is the weakest of all of the decks, but it is still close enough in power level compared to a deck from earlier in the format, maybe a Pure or an Ornament Riser. I think that deck is definitely just further behind in terms of power level. So we shall see if it is able to keep up and find ways to adapt and be strong. But of the 6 decks, I think Yummy and Vanquish Soul Cannon are definitely the pack leaders of the pack, and especially with the new store that we're going to look into, see how it progresses and continues to shape up. So yeah, the way that we're gonna start this off is looking at some of the Road to the King stuff. I'm gonna have the links to all this down in the description. This is the OCG's breakdown of mostly their local scene and some of their bigger tournaments. So we're gonna be able to look at the representation of the decks that enter, and then obviously some of the top cuts of their bigger tournaments. And yeah, I think that's just a good way to get a background knowledge. We'll see. Obviously, we can go through read every card, but from a competitive perspective, if you don't have the time to do that and be the chef that someone like Nesh is, you can just kind of take a glance at, hey, these decks and cards are performing well. This is what I need to review if I have an event coming up for region. Don't want to read every single thing. Yeah. Gonna skim all of this. This is obviously all the decks that are available. When you look at the pie chart, Yummy biggest representation in the early stages. Vanquish Soul, Malice, Dracotail. DDD is a deck that we'll see getting some new support. Sky Striker as well. And then Pure K9, Crystron, Lunalize, a deck that we saw perform well at the World Championship. White Forest as well. So I think these are all pretty expected. Pretty expected. The only new deck that we'll see is the DDD deck. This obviously they give you a breakdown of some of the lines and how some of these cards interact. So the newest card for Yummy is Marshmallow, and this card is very good. It fixes. From when I've talked to people, I haven't played any games of the format yet, so we're both going to be learning those together. But from what I've heard from my friends that have played, it doesn't do anything new, but it fixes a lot of your lose cons, where in the early format you would see people SP banish minion, and just be okay, now out an Ash Blossom that's set. And this card, it reads, if you control no monsters or they're all light beast monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand. So just an extender, which is something the deck struggled with sometimes. Yeah, so if you control no monsters, so if they just fully suit take your body, if you still have Marshmallow in hand, you're still good. Then this card is summoned, add a Yummy spell or trap from graveyard or hand. From graveyard, or if it's special by a synchro monster, you can place a Yummy field spell or continue spell or trap from your deck or banishment face up on your. So again, lose cons of losing field spells, running out of surprises, those are no longer a concern. And obviously it's another name, so consistency should never be a problem. It's going to be better draw than something like Lollipop in the early stages. Yeah. So Cormac, what are your early impressions of the Yummy deck and where it is?
Yeah, this is one of the decks that I've probably put more time into, more than any of the other ones up to this stage, just with my little bit of preparation that I've been doing so far. One thing that I did notice when I was looking at a lot of the OCG lists initially is they started playing 3 copies of Marshmallow and then cutting down on the Sky Striker engine because of the confliction that I noticed with the Marshmallow. You needing to have no monsters or all light beasts. So obviously, if you have a Kagari on your field or a Sky Striker token, then the Marshmallow isn't really an extender. So one thing that I thought was a little bit interesting about that from initially is whether that is just potentially one thing that I'm always conscious of, especially when we're talking about a new set, is sort of that new toy syndrome where people are looking to just start focusing on the new card immediately. I suppose one thing that I will be interested to learn about as we kind of go through this series is whether this Marshmallow is actually so strong that it should be resulting in you cutting down on this, Sky Striker engine, or whether that's maybe a case of, we're just kind of early in the format, we're still kind of figuring things out, and then maybe we're going to sort of be reevaluating that as time goes on. I suppose one other thing that I was thinking about with regards to the Yummy deck is that we see, a couple of different versions of this deck that are popping up. We saw that Triff had won the YCS Vancouver with a very hand trap heavy version of the deck, so it was looking to sort of prevent your opponent sort of doing any sort of major combos or anything like that. So there's like that, and then there's also the more breaker heavy version, which is playing like Songs of the Dominators, and there's playing a lot of other cards that are not involved in turning on cards like Izuna at all. So I suppose that's one thing where I'm curious to understand kind of potentially where you think we are right now in terms of which version is maybe better, and then as we kind of sort of continue on in this series, maybe kind of figuring out, does that sort of opinion change as Marshmallow exists? Because one other part of Marshmallow as well being the fact that it turns on Azuna when your deck otherwise completely ignored it, unless you were playing hand traps. I suppose it's another thing that I'm curious to understand kind of as we sort of continue on this way.
Yeah. I think currently like TCG format, I would definitely lean towards hand traps. The list that I've been playing at locals is like chummies and then whatever like good non-engine spells. I even have it in my so that's a card that also like conflicts with Marshmallow, so it's something that you have to be mindful when deck building, right? Like when your engine has restrictions on it, like what was the Donner card played for historically? I'm trying to remember, like to clear your board. I don't remember specifically, but like
Oh
yeah,
yeah, I used to play it in like Ryziel and stuff. I think that was a consideration back.
exactly. So like wait, when being able to out your own board is important. Like when you have something like this, so as you can see in this list, they're not playing the striker cards. They're not playing Nibiru anywhere. Just like pure ice map, and it's like a straight yummy deck. I'm not sure if this is how I would build it. If we end up start testing, like this is like not a bad place to start. Obviously, perform well. We'll look at some of the bigger tournaments as well, see what those lists look like. But I would personally probably lean still towards the Sky Striker cards. I think they're just very strong, and like you can still normal summon the Marshmallow. I don't think it really matters. Like as long as you draw a yummy name, I think you're kind of content with everything. And then especially like if you start off with the striker cards, you still have your normal summon later on to like play through something Holy Sue, or like if you get nibbed, like going Obedient School and then like Hornet Drone's Chain, or just like leaving a token on board, just like gives you extenders through everything, which I think is really beneficial. So yeah, it's probably not the first thing I would cut. I obviously the deck has performed well without it, so I don't think it's required, but it's not how I would lean personally. And then obviously like breakers are still acceptable, like we saw them perform well at Worlds. Wilfredo got top 4 playing breaker builds. There's a Malice list that also played full breakers, but when you say deck like Vanquish Soul, which is like pretty much like all engine and hand, like a few hand traps. So I think this deck kind of wants the extra interrupts because the cards that they gained weren't extra like inboard pieces. It's still just like the same. And I feel like the interrupts of this deck can get cut off, especially post side when there's cards like Ghost Bell, um, whenever there's like droplets or eclipse in the side. Like I think there's enough ways to interact with the inboard that you would prefer to have some other strong engine deck. And I don't think a card like Songs of the Dominator is enough. Or like going droplet like minusing one first. We'll come back to this one as we go throughout the conversation. This is definitely like one of the front runners, obviously in current format, and when it gets to extender slash like follow up, I think the deck will still be as good as it is now, if not better. So we've got Vanquish Soul now. They only get one new card. It is a canine card. So here we have K904. What is this? Nori. If your opponent has 2 or more cards in their hand, you can normal summon this card without tributing. And then each of the following effects once per turn. This card is normal summon. You can special summon 1 non-machine Canine monster from your deck. But you cannot special summon from the extra deck except Canine monster while you control that monster. And then you can send 1 face-up Canine card you control to the grave and look at your opponent's hand. So pretty strong effects. Obviously like the lock isn't super relevant if you just like go summon this guy, make a Ripper, and then go whatever. Obviously, the deck was already capable of making Saryuja. Logan Johnson posted a video recently where it shows like normal summon Nori gives you Saryuja also protected by Ripper, which is I think a really big benefit of the card. In the Canine Vanquish Soul deck, it gives you a more likely situation of Saryuja and get deeper into your deck if you don't draw the Vanquish Soul card. But this card seems like a one of that you would just include in the deck to make your engine a little more efficient. I think the deck already has like a good number of starters, but this card, like especially in multiples, doesn't provide anything. Doesn't have a way to get itself out of hand. And the effect of special is only if it's in. So I think there's some restrictions on the card that make in Vanquish Soul maybe not something good, but like if you're playing a deck like maybe K9 Fiendsmith or like a more pure K9 deck, which I've seen pop up sporadically throughout the OCG, like I think this is a card that makes those strategies way more viable.
Hey, yeah. So this is really interesting. So Vanquish Soul, being one of the decks that before the Canine cards, existed during the European Championship, is definitely a deck that I have a lot of knowledge on. And maybe less so with all of the Canine cards specifically, but I do know that there has been a bit of, a divide between whether people believe you should be playing a heavy Canine package in this deck or maybe playing a bit more of a slimlined one and playing, maybe some more non-engine or potentially other cards like, Small World or Pot of Extravagance within the deck. So I suppose even before taking in the new cards, I suppose that's one thing that I was kind of curious about initially, kind of trying to understand, where the benefits are of each of those. I can kind of get the idea behind increased consistency, with maybe the spell cards that are being put into your deck, because I definitely recognize that was the major issue with Vanquish Soul. I was actually very close to taking it to the European Championships, but that was like the biggest thing that was holding it back for me. And so looking at these Canine cards, I think especially Izuna, obviously being, one of the most impactful, hand traps we've seen in a long time, but also understanding that it could potentially gain value in a matchup that maybe it didn't before, say like into the Yummy matchup. Considering that the engine will now more likely than not also be turning it on. I suppose those are things I'm kind of thinking about right now, when I'm sort of evaluating Vanquish Soul at the moment. And I think when we talk about Noroi, that card, to me it reads quite strong, but I'm also not sure if it's necessarily that strong in the Vanquish Soul deck, because I feel like this deck can be quite normal summon heavy when you have the 3 Raisin and the 3 Madlov already in your deck. So I probably wouldn't want to be adding my initial assessment of it be with that, probably wouldn't want to be adding a lot of copy of that card into this sort of deck, but I do see the value of it in general, maybe in a deck that is less reliant on its normal summon.
Yeah. I think the argument for it in the deck, so like there's like probably a theoretical world where like if you're trying to like maximize the consistency of your going first deck, you would like max Case of K9. That way, and then like if you need to, maybe like you cut down on like a Jokel or two to justify this in terms of space. But that way you have either access to the normal summon of Nori, or you can like add Jokel as an extender or whatever. The issue with that obviously is like going second, you want attributes in hand. Case of Canine and Duplicates is fantastic. But obviously Case like gives you the send to look at your opponent's hand for Roy, right? No. So like the synergy between like Case and then being able to have both of those in your deck seems really cool. I think that makes, like I said, like maybe a more pure Canine focused deck like really strong. Obviously you have like chaotic elements, so, like keep your Case obviously like a new starter. So I think for Vanquish Soul, this seems like maybe a neat one of maybe especially in the deck that Julian played at Worlds where he like maxed Case of Canine. I think that this card performs even better. Because you're gonna see it more often, and like you're always gonna have access to get your engine going. But I think just like a normal, like if you're playing like the 3-1 or the 3-1-1, it's probably not a card you'd include. Yeah, I think it's definitely makes like the more Canine focused deck a little bit better, but I don't think it's like a requirement for the deck, especially if you're playing like Extravagance. Like it's probably not something I would maybe not even bother to include, because it's like an Earth, which is like not a primary attribute for your deck to function. So yeah,
Yeah,
we've
no, no,
got
no.
just kind of skimming over this list. Obviously, you see Saryuja in the deck, and then we've got Super Poly, which is becoming a little more popular because of a new fusion targets, which right here it is a Psychic monster plus a Synchro XYZ or Link monster, Axon Kicker Oracle. So yeah, this would be Holisu plus whatever extra deck monster, either Rocket the Vanquisher or just like a Ripper. So it's nice that it clears like Holisu plus like obviously like Ripper and then turned off the quick play spell. Obviously they can get back to it through Azuna, so it's not like a complete out, but definitely if your deck struggles versus Ripper, it's a nice thing to have access to, especially making Super Poly more versatile. Um, yeah, obviously like whatever's like normal extra deck stuff. This is also the new extra deck monster. Let me read over that real quick. K9666 Jax. Level 5, this card is XYZ summoned, or if your opponent activate a monster effect in the hand or graveyard, you can detach one material from this card and target one monster in the field, destroy it. And then you can only use effect once per turn, and then a Cannon XYZ monster that has this card as a material gains its effect. During any turn in which your opponent has activated a monster effect in the hand or graveyard, any battle damage this card inflicts your opponent. So it just makes Werewolf even stronger as like a game push. So I think it's another card that makes like the pure Canine deck better. Like I said, like makes Canine Werewolf just like already a card that can attack 2 or 3 times just like into game, like immediately. If it only has like maybe 1 or 2 materials. But again, these I don't think these are like super like big buffs to like the Canine Vanquish deck, which I think is reasonable. That deck's already like a pretty high power level. And you don't want to overtune anything. That is the end of that one. Obviously, we're gonna see Yummy. I think progress really well. So this is like I think one of the first major tournaments in China. 800 participants. This is I think the opening weekend of DOOD over there. We see Yummy, 2 of the finalists, and Canine Vanquish Soul, Fiendsmith Gem Knight, and then some more Yummy and Canine Vanquish on about Raizio. But yeah, if you look, skim through most of it's Yummy, a little bit of erratic other stuff, DD, Luna Light, but that seems to be the driving force. And then this list is maybe the exacts. I think it's the exact. This is the list that they copied for last article. Got trying to see this. So second list, pretty similar in terms of construction. Again, not playing Hornet drones, a few less chummies from there, and then Canine Vanquish Soul. I think this is this. And Fiends with Gem Knight, the deck that we've seen perform a little bit over the course of the TCG, and obviously top board or WCQ in North America. Wasn't legal for Europe, so we'll see if it ends up continuing its success. And considering it only has 1 engraver, 1 tracked, and like no necropip, I think that's like pretty noticeable to be like, hey, this deck had success in its like weakened state, so maybe it performs better over here. But when you see these types of decks that are like one-offs, like I wouldn't put too much stock into it being like there's always like a deck that just performs well in one single tournament. But so like it's probably a deck that if I had to guess right now in that format is like tier 2, tier 3, like or has like a really good like maybe die roll situation where if you win die roll you're very favored to win, but overall it's probably not a deck that's like super consistently going to show up in your tournament scene. Let me see if I can find the Yummy list. So this one does play Hornet drones. It does not play Engage though, which I think is kind of interesting. And then you see them cut down to 1 surprise because obviously Marshmallow Summon recycles it, so you don't have to play multiples. Or all these seem to be pretty hand trap centric. Hornet drones 1 engage. Yeah, so there seems to be a little bit of a trend of like low Hornet drone count, hand trap centric, a lot of Solemns on the side. So seems to be a bit of a even for like I think it's like the opening weekend tournament. Like the trend was already kind of found out from however people tested or kind of decided on what was good. And then we see this Silvera of the White Forest, which I think if you get like Dark Ruler, it like ends up becoming a play, and I think it does like double piercing or gives you plays through board breakers or correctly. So yeah, Cormac, what are your thoughts after kind of skimming through these early lists? Now that you've like obviously have your thoughts and develops.
Yeah, of course. I suppose the one thing that I did find quite interesting is just seeing how pretty much all of these Yummy decks are very heavy on hand traps here. I think I see, yeah, they play, a lot of Charmies, Ash, I mean, they play Maxi, obviously, because it's Maxi. But one thing I suppose I'd be curious about initially is just, I suppose, the impact of, obviously, Maxi exists in OCG, whereas it doesn't over here in TCG. But TCG, there seems to be a lot of people who are still following that hand trap mindset, but they're playing in TCG. You see, we're playing a lot of the more fair hand traps to fill out the deck. So cards like Veilers, Ogres, Bells, I kind of feel like I've been seeing a lot of those. Whereas I'm not seeing a ton of those in these deck lists. So I suppose one thing that I'd be kind of curious about when I'm looking at that is one, first off, do you think that that's potentially not like an oversight from the OCG, but if that is that something that you believe is like what is your I suppose one thing I'll be questioning about is your thoughts on that in the TCG perspective. Do you think those types of cards are high enough value like in the current format at the very least to sort of justify playing? And then secondly, I suppose as we sort of go through this this series and we start like playing more games, it's one thing I want to be curious about whether those cards maintain if we agree that those cards are of a level that they should be played in your deck, whether that sort of belief is maintained as we sort of go through these decks post dude.
Yeah, so I mean, I still see cards like Ash, Imperm, and Purge in most of the lists. The card that I see that takes place of like probably the other quote unquote hand traps is like I've seen Droplet kind of popping up pretty consistently. So it looks like yeah, that's like Ash, Imperm, Purge as like the non-engine. Obviously, they have Max C, the like take spot of like whatever we're playing, Ogre or Bell. I also have like Called by the Grave at 2, which I think is a card that we don't feel the need to play. But when there's whatever 2 Max C and then up to like 6 additional chummies, that's like and like obviously a card like Crossout, like I think that's like definitely more important for them. So like our additional non-engine is Ogre, Bell, Veilers, and for them it's like Called by Crossouts, um, Droplets, which I've seen a fair bit, and then whatever other consistency piece. Yeah, it's like 6 chummies, 2. So yeah, I think in terms of the non-engine count, it's like very similar. Obviously you get to play one prize. He's playing Prosperity and then like Pure Map instead of like the Hornet drones. So the deck format looks very similar. It's just they have I think a little bit higher quality of non-engine in terms of like Max E being available. And then Marshmallow summoning stuff from hands as like a starter, like Perulia I think becomes a little bit better. Obviously it's very good against Vanquish Soul. I think I think it's probably about right. Like when the deck's power levels get really high, the cards like Baylor and Imperm and all of those just seem to lose a lot of value. So I think they probably had a good based on the fact that all of these lists look very similar. I'm gonna assume that they are on the right track, and we'll see if the TCG follows suit. But in terms of like if we're say like Malice or Mitsu are still in the format, and we don't have Maxi to check them the way that the OCG does, then we'll see how the TCG has to adapt because a card like Droplet probably isn't going to perform as well as the way like something like a Maxi against those decks. Obviously, we see cards like Joel still on the side and whatever like Super Poly, but like in the TCG, I'm not sure how those cards would perform across like a little bit of a wider format. I guess because like Maxi obviously constricts the amount of like we'll say rogue or just like full on combo decks that you can play. Like DDD like may struggle against Maxi in the OCG, but in the TCG because we only have cards like Fua, Perulia. If they like find lines to beat those, then they're probably gonna perform even better. So those are my early thoughts. I obviously like the DDD deck. We're gonna go over it very briefly towards the end. So another tournament, I think this is like 2 weeks later. So they've obviously had the results of this. There's Yummy Canine Solfachord, which I'll pull some of the cards up for that. I assume that this looks more like a pure Canine deck than the 5th through 12 top 8, 5 Yummy, Malice, and Luna Light, which we've seen obviously have sporadic success. We got Sky Striker, which we'll briefly go over. But just as Dracotail, the deck that you see also a fair bit. And we are missing Spoon, so I haven't looked at too much of those lines. I think in the next video we'll probably try and pull up some of that stuff so we have a better idea of everything. I think his list is almost the exact same. Well, I think side is a little different, but the main deck seems pretty standard at this point. So Canine Sulfur from my limited knowledge of this deck, which is effectively like 0, I just see a level 5 in the deck, so I think everyone's just like, cool, we can play Canine cards in this. So we'll briefly go over those cards real quick. We also have like 2 of the normal summon guy, which like gets your deck into engine, 3 base. And yeah, I think this is probably just like a take on pure Canine deck. Obviously, you get to play Electromite and Beyond the Pendulum, which are all just like really broken Link monsters. I assume that's a part of it. But yeah, so the new Solfachord cards that are coming out in DOOD are Solfegia, Memoria, and Happiness, which I think is a 3 if I saw correctly. So activate one of these effects, because each effect once per turn, which is a line of text that I like on cards. Like Surprise has it, which I think is really neat. Like it doesn't punish you for rubbing multiples, especially if the effects are good like first and second. I think it's like a really intelligent card design. So discard 1 card if you do add 2 Silvercore Pendulum monsters with different pendulum scales from deck to hand, and then special summon pendulum monsters from your hand up to the number of monster controls +1. Pretty solid card. So there's 3 effects during your main phase's turn to conduct a pendulum summon of a Silvercore in addition. So additional pendulum summon. But it's -1, and the pendulum archetype or the pendulum mechanic is definitely way weaker than it has been in the past. So probably not going to be like a huge punish. Then special summon 2 Solfachord cards from in your Pendulum Zone, which I think is probably pretty broken. It doesn't surprise me that these cards found success if that is the text of this card. Then obviously the level 5 is Gracia. Spell or Trap. Your opponent can activate a spell or trap card monster effect when your Solfachord is Pendulum Summoned, so it stops like cards like Strike. And then when you have an even Pendulum scale in your Pendulum Zone, if your Solfachord Pendulum monster attacks, cards normal or special summon, you can add a Solfachord spell or trap. So level 5, summoned off of Dracotail, Search is a really good spell card. Makes sense. Then the other 2 cards, the level 2, 9 scale, effect is activated by opponent on the field resolves. If you control a Grand Solfachord monster, you can negate that effect and destroy this card. Monster effect negate. And then if you control no monsters or all monster control Solfachord, special summon from your hand. When you activate the following effect, you can also tribute this card. During your main phase, special summon 1 Solfachord monster from your hand. Or if you tributed card activation, you can special summon that monster from your graveyard or face up extra. Extender in that way seems not bad. Gloria, level 1, 0 scale. When you pendulum summon a monsters, target 1 Solfachord in the your pendulum zone and turn to the hand, which is nice. It gets value out of cards that you use skills, so you don't go minus. And Solfachords with even in odd skills in your pendulum zone, your activated Solfachord cards cannot be negated. Kind of niche, not too important, I think. You can use each of the following effects of Primordial once per turn. If this card's normal special, add a Solfachord card, so consistency, get your level 5s. And then if you link summon a Solfachord monster, add a Solfachord card from your grave or face up extra deck to your hand. So a lot of recursion, it looks like. I think it just seems pretty flowy. I've obviously get you some gates in the form the scale. But I think the primary purpose of this is just like consistent level 5s. A little bit of a ceiling to your end board, and then yeah, just probably like synergy with the canine cards. We'll obviously have to like watch gameplay with this, really understand what its strength is. But Cormac, do you have any thoughts after me rambling on all this for real quick?
Yeah, I suppose this kind of like falls roughly in line. When I see things like 3 case along with the multiple Nerois in this deck, this looks like a deck that, I mean, you see what 10 canine cards in this deck, so it's definitely looking to do like a heavy package of that. And I feel just based off what I read there, that's the level 1 that can be a normal summon, but it seems like something that just sort of flows almost more naturally with canine cards than maybe even something like the Vanquish Soul deck does, which kind of it almost kind of stumbles into using a lot of the canine cards because it has a couple of level 5s. I think just the card quality of everything probably gets it there, whereas this maybe has, I have to like look into it a little bit more because not everything is a level 5, so it's not as like immediately paired up. There is one in here from what I can see. But yeah, it seems like that there'd be a bit more of an immediate synergy, I suppose, based off of that. So yeah, it definitely looks interesting. I suppose when I see Pendulum, again, I'll have to look at it a little bit more. I'm wondering how heavily this is going to lean into combo. And I suppose the one thing that I always think about when I look at like a combo, if it does end up being like that, is, and this is going to be a similar question for DDD, it's never really about the quality of your end board when everything resolves.
Yeah.
That's like usually the vast majority of the time. I think in 2025 Yu-Gi-Oh, if you go completely uninterrupted on your turn 1, your deck is in 90% of cases, I would say, probably going to win the game. At least at a YCS level, it's going to be how resilient is it to the common hand traps, the format. How good is it at playing under cards like Purulia and Fuelos? So I suppose those are going to be like the questions that I would have probably as I go into that. Those are the things that carry from to this deck as well as into DDD as well.
I think very good points. And obviously, like after like we do some more research, we're like, hey, how important is a card like Electromite to this deck? If it is like vital, then obviously it's a deck that we can't play until that card becomes legal, ever. But if that is the case, then this deck obviously may become a little bit more viable. That's a fantastic point of like there's a consistent trend in Yu-Gi-Oh of pendulum decks. Like they can always make really good end boards, right? Like the Draco Slayer deck back in pure format, right? Like you could just straight up just like FTKU, like search Secret Village or Necro Valley, and on like whatever Appaloosa for X amount of negates or whatever the hell it was doing back in the day. But like, what was its non-engine count going second? It was like very low. In this deck, it seems a little bit higher. If I counted correctly, it was 16. You count call by crossout, which I should. And on top of that is Azuna, so 19 and 44, which is responsible, I think. Pretty good for modern Yu-Gi-Oh. And obviously like a respectable extra deck of nothing super crazy. Like maybe it tries to like do some Durandal draw locking. It plays the I forgot the name of this card, the 5 rainbow, I think, where it just like blocks
Five
you.
rainbow, yeah.
Yeah, Vanquish Soul opponent out of the game if you can, if they don't draw any spells or traps, or if you have like a consistent spells and traps, which is probably not how I'd like Yu-Gi to be played in terms of just like searching floodgates, but if it's accessible through like Electromine and Beyond the Pendulum, obviously you're gonna play it. I assume this other one of Pendulum Monster is also premise. Yeah, we'll see if a more pure K9 deck finds success in the TCG. Like I said, I think Fiendsmith has some synergy with it. This deck obviously like very accessible level 5s, a good sign. We'll see if like this takes the place of something like Crystron, where like both can be kind of combo centric, also have like pretty high non-engine counts, and how that like style of deck performs over here. And so we'll skim through this real quick. Lunalight, which you saw perform well, good strong combo deck. Most of these decks, it looks like, do not have consistent Tiger Dancer. Really good Malice, pretty standard. I mean, more young Sky Striker, which does not play any of the new support outside of the extra deck monster, which we can get into real quick. But yeah, Songs of the Dominator, it's like pretty breaker centric, upstart, thrust talents, which they're playing 3 talents and 3 thrusts, which is something that I would usually expect something like maybe Jackie or Dark or no more. The fact that they're just like full committing to the talents package, I mean, makes sense. Those cards are broken, but that's what I'm used to seeing. Okay, it's had the Regeki out. And then whatever, random stun and Crash Dracotail. So relatively diverse format, but just a Dracotail, which we'll hopefully get the support for at some point. And yeah, so let's get into some of the cards a little bit more. So we've gone over Solfachord. We've got the Magnificent Storming. We're gonna go over that a little bit more. I have a friend that's been working on some combo lines with it, so I'm gonna showcase those. But this is like I think the primary Magnificent Storm card that corresponds with Sky Striker. You can activate one of these effects. You can only use effect once per turn. So again, more of that text of you can use both effects if you draw duplicates, which I really like. Draw 2 cards and discard 1 Magnificent Storm card or a quick play spell. And if you don't have any in your hand, discard your entire hand. So Blur of Darkness restrictions. But the fact that you can draw first is really nice. Obviously, you can do this in the draw phase to play around cards like Troll and Lockbird. This is an archetype that is built around Mystical Space Typhoon, so we'll get more into the actual archetype itself. But in terms of it working with Sky Striker, you've got cards like Linkage, Lemnis Gate, Hornet Drones, obviously, just like a lot of Widow Anchor, so a lot of like really accessible quick play spells that you're already playing in your engine. And then the second, add a Mystical Space Typhoon from deck or graveyard to your hand. And if this card is destroyed by the effect of Space Typhoon, you can set it. I think the first effect is definitely the primary one, just like draw 2, discard 1, and then if you have like whatever else, you can just activate Engage first action to get a draw playing around a card like Troll. So I think it's a card that's neat. I've definitely seen Striker lists playing it, and we'll see if it becomes like the staple in the TCG or if it's just kind of like a that maybe the deck becomes a little more combo focused if you're trying to do this and go first. Obviously, the card that we are still missing from Sky Striker is Mela, which is 2 effect monsters. Must first be link summoned, and then the relevant effect is if you have 3 less spells in your grave, you can send 1 Sky Striker card from deck to your graveyard. And then if this card's sent to the graveyard, target one monster from control special summon this card to their field. If you do, send that monster to the graveyard. And it's just control during it. So yeah, just sending the Sky Striker card, getting access off a card like Kagari. Really strong. We'll see whenever we get this. We were kind of hoping for Injustice Hunters. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do it. Or Duet, I think, was the actual set. Maybe this becomes DOOD. But in terms of the actual DOOD support for Sky Striker Atsu. And when a monster your opponent controls with 2,000 or more attack activates its effects, quick effect, you can make the activated effect become destroy when Sky Striker Ace Link your opponent controls. So that's nice. Obviously, you get to trigger something like Gray, and then like just force yourself into something like 0 or trigger like a Shizuku in the end phase, depending on when this happens. And when attack is declared involving this card and opponent's monster, target a Sky Striker Ace monster you control, and 1 card your opponent controls, destroy them. And then only use each effect once per turn. So nice new effects. Link 1, obviously versatile in that regard. You can summon it off of Ray on your opponent's turn, and obviously it's like for free with Rose and Hornet Drones. So Cormac, what are your thoughts on Striker? I'm not sure if you watched Worlds at all. I think you were in Paris actually, so maybe you had to watch Bell play it in Top Cut.
Yeah, I was there. Was fortunate to be able to get access to World Championship was great to see. And I think, one of the things that I found quite intriguing was, that the Sky Striker deck that Rizal played, because I know I've been hearing a few murmurings about it just from seeing, these cards coming out in Dude, but also just in general, I've been seeing a little bit of hype around the deck. I mean, Sky Striker, there's always going to be some hype, but just about its ability to play into some of the fields in the format. I suppose one thing that I'm always conscious about is kind of how, like, for Striker, it has to be how good it is at sort of breaking those fields. Like when I play against like Vanquish Soul, for example, I in my mind I always feel like that would be a very difficult matchup. Obviously, Luna Light, we saw that in top four. That's probably a bit more of a fringe case. I woulight be expecting a lot of Luna Light, at least at the moment, but maybe potentially that could be a pick in the future. But yeah, I suppose that's one thing where myself coming in with less knowledge of a format than I probably would on average, with all the new decks that have come out with, like, Yumi, you got the multiple different canine decks like Crystron, and which I did see that Roselle did actually manage to beat in top 8, so that's probably a good sign. And Vanquish Soul as well, of course. Just how capable it is at sort of playing into a lot of those decks. Like, because the card quality is quite high in Sky Striker. But I'll have some. That's one of those ones where I'll have to play around with it a little bit to kind of get a full feeling for exactly how good it is.
So Dracotail got 2 new cards, which is the last Justice Hunters deck that we'll go over. Brixel. This card's normal special summon, target Dracotail in your graveyard, special summon it, and return a monster you control to the hand. So ISO Extender gets cards back in hand, which I think is really important. Deck, obviously. It's like a card like Malulu engrave that you get it on board and then get a material for it. And then if this card's sent to the graveyard for a fusion material set, so it's effective as one. And there's a new trap card, Dracotail Sting. Target 1 monster and or spell or trap in your opponent's graveyard, banish them, and you can place a Dracotail and banish deck, draw a card. So the card doesn't read anything super impressive, but the fact that it is an additional card that you can play that like creates a more diverse end board. Also another card that shuffles back from the bottom, so it is less likely for you to get cut off of everything in terms of all the traps. I think makes it good. And then just like having, because all the traps are pretty limited in their usage, like they all have like pretty specific activated, just having another one makes it even harder for the deck to play around, or like your opponent's deck to play around all of them. And it like makes your deck grind a little bit better. I think the deck unfortunately still may struggle a little bit with just like setting up actually strong inboards. Like if it is just Dracotail playing Dracotail, and like with like, the non-engine usually has to carry it, or like the additional engine in terms of branded or skulls. Obviously, Jesse was able to perform well in Vancouver. If you were able to see that, he made top 8 with like a pretty hand trap focused deck, Cartesians and just like some Fenrirs on the side, which I think just kind of speaks to his ability. But like a lot of the other lists that I've seen haven't that type of deck. That they've had to all have some other engine to up the ceiling of the deck, just to kind of like keep the power level similar to like Vanquish Soul Canine or Yummy. So what are your thoughts on the Dracotail deck currently, Cormac?
Yeah, this is probably the one that I was lowest on for my brief, looking at the format sort of before we had this conversation, just because I find that the power level of the deck is probably just a little bit below the other two. I feel like whenever I look at that deck, I see its end board when it goes first, and I feel that it's quite limited compared to like Vanquish Soul Canine or Yummy. And even going second into Yummy, like from my understanding of the format, a lot of people say that Dracotail will be favored into Yummy, and then Yummy should be a little bit favored into Vanquish Soul Canine, and then Vanquish Soul Canine should be favored into Dracotail. So my understanding, people have been telling me it's like a bit of a triangle format. You can sort of feel free to correct me on that. But going second into Yummy, it looks like it would even be a little bit difficult for this deck, just because the nature of cards like Herald of the Arclight existing, and things such as that. So I've been a little bit low on this deck from the little bit that I understand, and when I see this, I see another third trap card, which is another thing that can provide level of interaction on your end board. But I suppose the questions I would have immediately are, first off, is this good enough to like increase the quality of your end board to really turn your deck from where it is now into something that could be like a really, really top tier meta contender? Like we even saw at World Championship, like none of the world's competitors ended up bringing the deck. So we see that maybe it's sort of losing a little popularity there. Maybe people are recognizing that it's maybe not quite at the same level of some others. And I suppose another thing is we're talking about adding a potential third trap card into the deck then at that stage. And then when we're talking about a list like Jesse's list, for example, which is trying to play very low to the ground, a lot of hand traps, not playing too many sort of cards that can be dead or very unusable. Adding another card that isn't really helping you do anything going second, and when you draw it can be quite weak. Is definitely something that I would be a little bit concerned about initially. So those are kind of like the first immediate thoughts that come into my head when I look at that. But I do see value in some of the cards that are being brought out here.
I think those are all fantastic points. Like you said, like people think that the Dracotail Yummy matchup is like very Dracotail favored, and as someone that has been playing the Yummy deck a little bit more, especially if your deck is hand track focused, where like you're playing cards that will stop Artholion from getting all of that value, and obviously in Herald the Arclight, where they don't get any value off of a card like Raku or Ketu if they're refusing. I think the matchup is a little more difficult than I was initially led to believe. If you're playing Breaker Yummy, I think Dracotail probably performs really well into it because you just like have more options in terms of you're gonna get reacted to in like a more noticeable way. Like you have knowledge of okay, 4 set cards. I can kind of like sequence my things a little better. But when it's 3 or 4 cards in hand, it's kind of hard to like have an idea exactly of what you're against. So yeah, I agree that I think the Dracotail deck is probably the weakest of everything right now. We'll see if that is able to change. I don't think these cards like fix the power level like you acknowledge the trap card. Obviously, lower increases the inboard ceiling like slightly, but again, having another non-monster card in your deck is for like, monster heavy fusion decks. I think you probably play both of these as one ofs. They're both like good cards, but they're not like fixing any of the inherent problems that the deck has compared to something like Marshmallow, where the deck kind of struggled with the grind game when you, like in terms of getting surprise back in rotation, and if you got Holy Su taken on turn 0, like were you able to extend? This card fixes both of those problems, which I think is really important for the deck's longevity. This one, these 2 cards don't fix anything. Bit of a concern there. And then we have the DDD deck, which we didn't see any deck lists for, but I was able to pull one up. This is just a very interesting deck. It's generally pretty combo-centric, pendulum focus, obviously. This deck came out in 2017 in a structure deck, and it's just like repeatedly gotten support over the years. We'll kind of just like skim some of the older stuff, and then this will be like one of the more relevant decks in like the combo videos because this deck has like a lot of different ways to play it. So the cards that I think are the most relevant are so obviously like there's cards like Dark Contract with the Gate, which is a search. Kepler is a level 1 normal summon, which searches any Dark Contract. And there's a new Dark Contract, which we are getting. The card that I've seen played primarily at 1, which is also treated as a DD card. And then you target a DD card you control, accept itself, destroy it, and if you do special summon from a monster from your deck, and then you can only summon a DD monster for the turn, but like that's not the only card with this restriction. It's not a big deal. Like you're playing a DD deck, it's not an actual issue. And then they all have the like condition of once per turn during your standby, take 1,000 damage. So just having a new Dark Contract that can either clear your scale to like, get a monster to pendulum summon, or pop an additional monster that some of them have effects when they're popped, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I've read all of these, but just being able to get cards out of your deck like Kepler to search in a Dark Contract, Vernicus, which is a Foolish Burial, a lot of strong utility on some effects. And then the primary like inboard piece that they're getting now is or not inboard piece, but like extender. It's a rank 4 DDD Wisdom King Solomon, and then it's a detach a material, add a DD card, so you can add this because it's a DD card obviously, or it's like any of the monsters. And then it has like banish, target DD monster, control, gains an effect. But like the primary thing is like rank 4 search. And then there's new cards like DDD 0 Demise King, 0 Machinex. During your main phase, if this card is placed turn, so it's a pendulum effect, you can place 1 Dark Contract, continue spell or trap from your deck, face up on the field, which is just really broken effect. And then destroy special summon this card. So it has an effect. It is you face up in your extra deck, you can summon itself. So it's an extender whenever you activate a card like Dark Contract with 0 King, gets itself back on board. But the scale effect is the primary reason to use this. It's a 0 scale, so just the perfect low scale, and then activate any card from your deck that either searches or extends. It's going to be a 3 of if you're playing the deck, obviously. And then the additional extra deck monster we got was a Sky King Zeus Ragnarok at length 3. 2 plus DD monsters, target 1 DD or Dark Contract, destroy it. Also, during your main phase, you can conduct an additional Pendulum Summon. And then when your opponent activates a monster effect in the hand, quick effect, banish 1 DD monster or Dark Contract from your graveyard, negate the activation. So just its own little ripper on the end board, which is kind of neat. Um, but yeah, the primary like end board pieces that you've like historically seen in the deck are Wave Hacking Caesar, which we've seen splashed in Teamspit throughout time. This is a more specific one to the DDD archetype, but it's a targeted Hot Red Archfiend, so it's targeted face a spell or trap card on the field. It's negate. Um, yeah, and then obviously we've got the like middle level of support, Gilgamesh. If this card is special summon, you can activate this effect, except DDD monsters, and then you just like get to place 2 scales from your deck, which is just an absurd effect when you have broken scales like Machinex in the game. So, what is your experience with the deck, Cormac, and what are your thoughts on it after having glanced over some of the new stuff?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the new cards do all read like quite strong. Like I think that Link 3 insulating you from Nibiru um, is definitely something that will probably catch people off guard in the early couple of weeks as well about the deck. So I think this is the type of deck where I look at it and I what similar to when I was talking about the Canine Solfachord deck, but this one I think is more very clearly like especially with DDD historically very heavy combo. So understanding its lines through some of the more common hand traps, so your Fuoloses, your Perulias, how it plays into things like Troll and Lockbird, for example. Because I can imagine this deck might end up searching quite a lot to get access to all of its pieces. Like I mentioned, yeah, those are the important things, and then also its ability to go second, because I also have to see how much non-engine a deck like this would be able to play these sort of very heavy combo decks, can sometimes be very limited in their non-engine counts. I think when I see this here, we've like
14.
8, 11 or so, not counting the call buys and crossouts, I
Yeah,
suppose. So
about
like
11.
14. Yeah, yeah. So if there's enough space there within this type of deck, yeah, I suppose yeah, there's always an opportunity for it to, um, for it to become a contender. I suppose yeah, when I look at combo decks in modern Yu-Gi-Oh now, I feel like there was a point in time where before we had the mulch armies, where new combo decks could come out and kind of just completely catch people off because there wasn't really a whole lot of high quality hand traps that we had to be able to prevent them, doing everything. So yeah, I suppose that's the main thing for me is to see how good it plays into those cards and then how good it's able to play going second as well.
Obviously, yeah, fantastic points. Obviously with cards like Impulse now, which is a card that this deck can play, but like it's also a card that can definitely be interactive against you. And as we've like historically seen cards like Ghost Ogre, which are currently being played, we'll see if that transfers over to the next format. That definitely is like a big hindrance on your Pendulum deck. So I think the deck has potential. The cards, like you said, they all read like really high quality. The deck already had pretty high quality cards, but there's a reason it wasn't already currently being played. We'll see if how many did we get? We got one, two, three, four new main deck monster or cards, and then the additional 3 extra deck. So that's enough of a wave of support that I would expect if the deck is going to be playable. Like this is obviously we'll see if a card like Joel Lockbird comes into the format like a lot of these cards searching. We'll see like how that affects it. Obviously, like a card like Gilgamesh places, so there's probably lines you can do through it. But at the end of the day, like it's still it's gonna hinder you to some. Um, yeah, this deck is definitely like probably like the coolest one of the bunch in terms of like its potential. But yeah, I think that is a good stopping point. Cormac, thanks for hanging out. Do you have any final words based before we let you go?
Yeah, I just want to say I really appreciate you taking the time to run through all this with me. I feel like I kind of have a good idea of some of the new cards that are coming out, kind of seeing where they're going to be placed in the format, and I'm kind of looking forward to us getting into a few games as we go along and kind of learning a bit more.
No, yeah, thank you for getting me to do this because I'm usually pretty late when it comes to this type of stuff. But now that we're making content, got to be a little ahead of the curve. So it's makes it way easier having this conversation with a friend where you can just kind of shoot the shit and learn about it together. So much appreciated, my friend. We will have the next video up probably later, maybe probably early next week, where we'll get into some combo videos and learn about the decks a little more. Yeah, thank you for joining me. We'll see you all in the next one.